What's up, everyone? I hope you're doing well today. Today, we're going to be talking about Defcon and a darknet market called Archetype. Many of you are already pretty familiar with Defcon, which is my favorite hacking conference in the world. I do find that with each year that goes by, it seems to get a little bit more corporate, I think, but that's completely different issue for another day. Today specifically, the actual topic is going to be a scavenger hunt that was actually sponsored by Archetype. Notice of this was on August 9th. Defcon had basically already been going on at this point for a while. It actually started on the 8th. The announcement basically announced that the next day on the 10th, the contest would begin. At that point, you're already 48 hours into the Defcon conference itself, and this might not have actually mattered if Defcon had lasted a week or more, but this just isn't the case. That's not how long the conference actually goes for. This basically meant that the contest would be held for 24 hours, and then that was it. The post also mentioned, something about cracking encrypted hashes. Initially, it wasn't really clear what this actually meant. However, a post by Archetype contained a signed PGP message letting people know that they were actually running this event. Like, they were the ones that were responsible for it. At least that's what I got from it. In actuality, they said that they weren't the ones that were actually, quote-unquote, organizing the event, and that instead they were just overseeing it. I have a real issue with this one, but of all the beautiful things about the Darknet and its people is that anonymity allows you to typically be much less superficial if you're anonymous. Like, I can't judge you for the clothes you wear or the way you speak or how much money you have if I can't see you, right? And this leads me only to be able to judge you based on things like how you act, what you respond to, how articulate you are, and the level of intelligence that you actually have because you demonstrate it. Now, with that in mind, imagine a pilot claiming that they didn't actually fly the plane. Instead, they just observed the flight. It makes absolutely no sense, especially when they're the ones that are actually funding the prize. They're trying to keep the appearance of control while avoiding any real responsibility whatsoever. And this way, they can try to dodge when people point to how just absolutely ludicrous things really are with this. It's not anyone else's scavenger hunt. This is apparent by many things, including by the signed PGP message. In my point of view, the whole idea of overseeing without actually organizing is really nothing more than like a weak and desperate attempt to try and sidestep blame in case anything happens to go wrong, while remaining in a position where they get tangible value from their name actually being used. And many people think that the Darknet is just like the wild, wild west. And, initially it kind of has that appearance, so I get it. But it still, the ability to actually verify clarifies and promotes accountability in this space. And it was very cool, or at least interesting, to see like this way of promoting themselves. Like, many darknet markets compete really hard to actually be able to get good publicity in one way or another. For example, there's a darknet market named Black Spurt, and it was considered a successor to Hydra. They ended up getting their market on a billboard or two in Russia, and how they did it was, no one really knows, about hook or crook, meaning, like, I personally am not quite sure if they actually paid to have it put up there or, acted like they did. My point is that coming up with, innovative PR for a darknet market is something you see in many successful markets. So I'm sharing this video with you to really discuss the odds of accomplishing this challenge, even just to begin with. But before we actually get into all that craziness, when you start throwing around phrases like cracking encryption hashes, like you're not just upping the ante, so to speak. You're setting a bar that might absolutely be too high or impossible for the majority of participants. So one particular user, Copesex, pointed out this kind of challenge might be so overwhelming that it could actually scare off a lot of the would-be contestants, making it seem like they're setting up a game that there's no real way to win. If there's less completion and fewer payouts, basically, and if you can get less people to compete, you have a lesser chance of actually having a payout and a lot of the hype without actually having to deliver on that $10,000 prize. And it's a smart move if you're looking to create buzz while minimizing the actual risk of actually having to pay out. But it's also a bit of a kind of a bait and switch, if you ask me. In any case, Archetype responds to his comment by saying, "I love you too," which is, it's an obvious sidestep to Copesex's comment about how Archetype was actually going about organizing this entire thing. First and foremost, the requirement to crack the hashes, to find the sticker locations, was always going to be a major hurdle. Hashes, especially those that are generated from strong algorithms, are not trivial to crack at all without really significant computational power and prior knowledge to back it up. Now, try to imagine you're at a conference, right? Like you don't have access to your RTX 4090 where, you can use your crazy GPU to crack anything to begin with. Like you're damn sure don't want to log into any kind of like RDP session, or if you have the ability to remote into that workhorse computer, you might not actually want to do that because you're at a hacking conference. Like the fact that no one managed to crack the hashes within 24-hour window really reinforced the point that this challenge was likely to, way too difficult for other people and poorly designed, for the participants in this case. This issue ties directly into what was discussed earlier regarding the term cracking encrypted hashes and how it set completely unrealistic expectations. By the time the contest ended, it became apparent that the challenge might have been designed in a way that was more about generating hype than actually awarding a prize. The final edit in the post at the bottom stating that there were no winners and that, next year's puzzle would be easier seems to acknowledge this flaw without actually addressing it directly. Furthermore, the post edit really reinforces the perception that the actual organizers may have not fully understood the technical complexities that were actually involved in this contest, while obviously the Archetype admin was aware of this issue, citing that the user Archetype Defcon host lacked the technical ability, obviously pointing to the fact that Big Boss Chief of Archetype obviously isn't technically unskilled, right? Which points to the fact that this challenge would be too much for the majority of people, and he still allowed it to go forward. So what's actually worse, the guy the admin says doesn't know because of his lack of technical skills, or the admin who insinuates that he has the technical skills to do it and allows it anyway. Announcing that they will make it a little easier next year suggests that they definitely underestimated the difficulty of the challenge this time around, leading to an outcome with no winner. Not only was this done for blocking the generalized location of the clues by putting them in hashes, but furthermore, in addition to making it so that people couldn't actually get that first clue of where the QR code was located in Las Vegas, the scope originally was the entire city of Las Vegas, which, basically you'd have to search 3.76 billion square feet of the entire city. Does that sound realistic to you? And this is if you didn't bother getting the original clues. Now, keep in mind, that number is strictly on the assumption that it's on the first floor of every building in Vegas, right? Like, remember, if you were actually able to crack the hashes, then the scope of where you actually have to search would be limited to the locations of MGM Grand, Caesar's Palace, and the actual Defcon convention where it was actually held. And once you limited it to these three places, then your scope would go from that 3.76 billion square feet to 2 million square feet. That said, like, it's still an absolutely insane number. And you still need to keep in mind, if you found one, it didn't matter. You still had to find the other two in order to be able to claim the actual prize. So even if somehow you managed to defy the odds and get all three of these locations, you would still have quite a bit of work ahead of you to be able to find all three of the actual QR codes, which are required for you to win the prize. From an outsider's perspective, I would say that the goal was to create buzz about the scavenger hunt and specifically the market hosting it. Like, this absolutely worked because Caesars had prop bets on whether or not someone would actually win. Also, a ton of different people messaged me personally about this very thing, which just further confirmed that the simple post on Dread was far more enough than they actually needed to get the word out. Now, I want to quickly look at how absolutely insane mathematically, and I'll keep the mathematics very short. And I'm not a mathematician, so I could absolutely have totally screwed this up, but these are kind of like my about numbers. So I wanted to give you a ballpark, and that's basically what this is, because I'm not a mathematician at all. It would have been extremely difficult for someone to find these QR codes. Obviously, this is, completely discounting the fact that you actually had to crack the hashes before you even knew where to look initially. So we can see why this entire thing was basically just a complete waste of time and a massive gaslighting campaign on the part of Archetype as a whole against those who actually participated in it. The setup. So the scavenger hunt started on August 10th and lasted only 24 hours, probably due to the absolutely atrocious planning, which again speaks volumes about the actual admin's ability to plan and execute effectively, which is kind of worrying, but participants needed to find the three QR codes hidden across the mass of locations: Caesar's Palace, the MGM Grand, and Defcon, like we said before. These locations collectively span roughly 2 million square feet. Now, consider that, say around 500 people were, likely participating in the hunt. And this is a number I simply just pulled out of thin air. According to Wikipedia, Defcon 31 and Defcon 30 both had attendee numbers around 30,000 people. So I'd say that estimating that 500 people were searching the area, for the 24 hours at the concert was, maybe even overestimating who actually participated. So searching the actual area, if participants effectively searched about 1,000 square feet every hour on the hour, which is absolutely generous considering the fact that you're looking under, planted pots and underneath chairs, under desks, in the bathrooms, and pretty much anywhere else where there are nooks and crannies or places that you could hide something the size of an SD card. Remember that the entire thing was only 24 hours. So if they did this and they stayed up for 24 hours and they, somehow were able to abide at the exact same pace at the end of the 24 hours, they would have covered 240,000 square feet, right? Throughout the entirety of the event. And that's almost 250,000 square feet, which absolutely, sounds like a crazy amount of space, right? Remember, this is you searching 1,000 square feet in every nook and cranny, every hour on the hour for 24 hours straight. And by the end of that, you would have covered about 12% of the 2 million square feet that you actually had to search through to find it. You had to find all three codes, not just one, to be able to win the prize. Since the codes were in different locations, each one was independent. So if you multiply the individual probabilities, it's a 0.000125% chance that one person would be able to actually find all 3 QR codes. So to put that in perspective, you're 8,000 times more likely to get struck by lightning in your lifetime than to have found all 3 QR codes in the scavenger hunt. To put it into another perspective, you're far more likely to win the Powerball jackpot, where the odds are about 1 in 292 million, which is a daunting figure to begin with, yet still far more achievable than this particular challenge. Even the chances of being attacked by a shark are about 1 in 3.7 million, which are exponentially higher than finding these QR codes. To drive home this absurdity, consider that the odds of dying in a plane crash are about 1 in 11 million, which is vastly more probable than winning this contest. We're not taking into account the fact that we actually had to decrypt these hashes to even begin with. Time constraints. Now, as if this wasn't bad enough, the odds become even more unrealistic because participants only had 24 hours to search. And like we calculated before, that means you can search a total of 12% of the area. The vast areas where the codes were hidden and clues were just generalized locations, from my understanding, like Caesar's Palace or MGM Grand, which are enormous venues. Even with the best strategies and perfect conditions, the sheer size of the search area and the limited time make the odds absolutely small. And when we look at, past Darknet markets that did well, we see that they made anywhere from 100 million to 400 million, which obviously there's a pretty massive difference in what specific markets have actually made in the past. But Archetype is one of the top markets. And the last time that I was there were well over 420,000 users that were registered and had an account, which would absolutely put them in the weight class of those heavy earners that we mentioned. Now, having people scramble around in a desperate attempt to try and get 10 grand with an almost impossible challenge is beyond cruel, in my opinion. This is especially true given the current economic situation of many people, including myself. I have no doubt that there are a few people who got distracted from the conference that they paid so much to actually get to and ended up spending a good portion of their own time going on this fool's errand. If Archetype actually wanted to do some good, they easily could have said that, if no one actually gets it, which of course they already ran these numbers. They knew that no one was going to get it ahead of time and that, it was just inevitable. They would have actually done something. Like they would have said, if no one gets it, then we'll donate the money to the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is the EFF, or donate to ITP, or something that actually benefits the community. There is no doubt that this would have gotten them a ton of, complimentary attention. Instead, they created a challenge on a whim. So right off the bat, if someone did have a computer or a server that was capable of doing a difficult task like cracking these hashes, they didn't have access to it because they didn't know about it ahead of time and they couldn't bring that hardware there. And on top of, and this is why like a lot of these villages, like hacking villages and whatnot, they tell people ahead of time. And on top of that, even though, Defcon had multiple days in the time span, they elected to limit it to one short 24-hour period. And they also made it so that you would basically have to get all 3, which pretty much solidified it as impossible, as a task as a whole. And all in all, I found this pretty disgusting behavior. Like this market could have easily made $100,000 prize and made it so that any given QR code was worth, say, $1,000. And this would have greatly increased the odds of them actually being found. In addition, they could have donated whatever wasn't found and done a ton of good for, these communities, whether it's a Darknet community or the hacking community as a whole. Instead, they elected to hold on to the 10 grand as if it was like 100 million. 10 grand is a lot of money for me personally. I know a ton of people who, like me, are, just dealing with inflation on a daily basis and struggling just to get groceries. 10 grand would be a good amount for people like that, but it's a pittance in comparison to someone who runs a darknet market who's making tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on a regular basis. The fact that they had to rig a game, to me, is even more disgusting. I'd imagine the admin of Archetype would try to say something, along the lines, they only oversaw it, and, which is what they said in their signed message. To quote them, they said, "The person who organizes this event is not me, but yes, Archetype will pay the price of $10,000 in XMR, and we oversee it. I'm in contact with the person, and I hope this event will catch some interest. We hope to organize things like this more often in the future." Now, note how, in one line they say that they're not the actual ones that are organizing this event, but then on the other hand, they turn around and they say that we, i.e. both parties mentioned, hope to organize things like this more often in the future. So in one sense, they say they didn't organize things, but in the other sense, they say that they did. Apparently, they oversee it, but don't organize it, but actually do organize it and hope to do more of them in the future. Like, I too would hope to do more of them in the future if advertising costs nothing and you could play people into searching for something that mathematically they'll never actually find. And what was really disappointing was, all in all, I didn't see many people, if any, really calling any of this out on Dread, which is actually, for me, was super disappointing. Like, I didn't see one person besides one user named Locomotives who pointed out the fact that Defcon is basically full of cameras and feds. We've seen in the past the darknet market admins and major vendors who have had horrendous operational security mistakes and end up paying for it with decades, or in some cases, life sentences in prison. That fact alone should have played a deterrent. It's absolutely, in my opinion, the obligation of Archetype to tell people how to safely operate when participating in something like this. A great example, for example, would have been to use Tails and to make sure that you have a throwaway account when you're submitting your answer or something. Like, it's not rocket science. Even something as simple as that would have at least showed a little bit of care and consideration for the individuals they're telling to go out and find the QR codes, and just the complete lack of any type of even passive suggestion to those people, in my opinion, absolutely demonstrates a complete lack of care or consideration for the people that they're trying to get public relations from and attention from. And argumentatively, I would say that, it's a currency. Time and energy is something that costs money. It takes effort. So you're robbing people, essentially. It's a scam. And all of this, again, for an amount of money that the administrator looks at like me and you look at a nickel, right? It absolutely blows my mind that there's not a complete outrage over this entire thing to begin with, and that Locomotive was the only user that actually had something to say about something that just completely has a lot of severe issues and built into it from the start regarding a real life treasure hunt. And what's now Locomotive was the only actual user that had something to say opposing this actual scavenger hunt nonsense, and at what now is a largely corporate conference that openly embraces and loves feds. And none of this is classified or hidden. So much so that games have actually been invented that revolve around them, like Spot the Fed, where you can find a federal agent and you get a free t-shirt. And over the years, like specifically since 2015, 30 different federal agencies have actually reportedly sent representatives to this conference. The founder of Defcon, Jeff Moss, actually served on the Homeland Security Advisory Council for 9 years, from 2009 to 2017. In 2016, Defcon actually partnered with the Pentagon for a Hack the Pentagon initiative, or so it was called. This is basically, they invited hackers to come in and try to attack the Department of Defense's public-facing website. And this is tantamount to pimping out the various highly intelligent individuals who, love Defcon to the feds, for the feds to have a free pen test on their public-facing site, essentially. Like, that's what it was. In addition to that, it's one of the only hacking conferences that actually has a Meet the Feds panel, where representatives from the FBI, NSA, and the Secret Service openly discuss cybersecurity issues with, various attendees. Again, that's all consensual, though. Like, that's pretty out in the open. Everyone knows about that. So you can say, oh, it's not really a big deal. But along with Jeff Moss actually being on the Homeland Security Advisory Council for 9 years, you should also, know the fact that in some cases, there's actually been open cooperation with law enforcement. Chris Pageant, for example, was at Defcon 15 as a presenter and was a security researcher who it was set to demonstrate a vulnerability that he had found in RFID chips, but out of nowhere, Defcon suddenly canceled his talk. At the time, it was speculated that the Defcon organizers had done this due to intervention from law enforcement who was concerned about the potential legal implications of the talk, as well as public exposure of sensitive information. One thing we definitely know is they're not his lawyer. They weren't concerned about him. During Defcon 20, a group of hackers uncovered a serious vulnerability in a hotel's electronic door lock. This shouldn't really be a big surprise when you consider the fact that Defcon is the biggest hacking convention in the world. Like, during that incident, it was rumored that federal agents were basically quickly involved in this investigation and, deliberately prevented disclosures that would be public so that, the security of the hotel wouldn't be compromised, and, supposedly on a national level. And the fact that it happened so quickly shows that there's probably a good amount of behind-the-scenes cooperation that actually takes place. Then you had the voting machine hacking village during 2017 with Defcon 25, which allowed hackers to expose vulnerabilities in the U.S. voting system. And after the vulnerabilities were found, the Defcon organizers were reportedly in communication with federal and state authorities to discuss the findings and potential implications for election security. Once again, through the back door, pimping out the intellectual abilities of the attendees, specifically for the feds. During Defcon 22, there was a debate titled No More Free Bugs. And essentially this debate centered around hackers revealing critical software vulnerabilities and that time where there was a growing discussion around whether vulnerabilities should in fact be disclosed directly to the companies that were actually involved or to the government. Can you guess which side the Defcon organizers landed on? It wasn't to side with, the people who actually discovered vulnerabilities, but rather it was to practice statism and side, with the people who can't fix potholes. So that was awesome. They ended up facilitating these discussions, which, in my opinion, absolutely showed a, cooperative stance with law enforcement. That's something from everything I've seen that they actually pride themselves on. At Defcon 17 in 2009, there was a talk about vulnerabilities inside the Tor network, which attracted obvious significant attention from various federal agencies. Said presentation led to a behind-the-scenes discussion between the Defcon organizers and the Tor project and feds about various issues that would be coming from or arise from publicly discussing such vulnerabilities. The Defcon organizers elected to coordinate with law enforcement, big shock, in order to censor the talk so that those who they deemed malicious actors would not be made aware of the various disclosures that would be made in the presentation. During Defcon 26 in 2018, the airport hacking village was actually introduced, and This is where hackers exploited vulnerabilities in aviation systems, including airport security protocols. And following the event, there were reports that the Defcon organizers had actually coordinated with the Department of Homeland Security before the information was actually released. Again, being sure to sanitize all information that was given out after the feds gave their approval. At Defcon 30, again, we saw the biohacking village, which focused on vulnerabilities in medical devices, caused interest by various federal agencies, including the FDA. They were involved in discussion both before and after to address security flaws that were uncovered. Once again, information was actually kept from the people that they were trying to present it to in a very nanny state type way. My point with all of this is that the feds and Defcon have a long and intimate relationship. Now, can you imagine a general that sends foot soldiers out to go fight a battle where they've done absolutely no reconnaissance and have no intelligence about it? There would be a massive amount of casualties in that case. And in this case, the Archetype admin either did no investigations or didn't care enough to actually provide any kind of guidance or semblance of intelligence for those who may be participating in this completely rigged game. Like, it's bad enough that you couldn't win to begin with, and to make it even worse, to add insult to injury, there's a complete disregard for the people's security who would actually be participating in it. It would take virtually no time at all to give people some basic precautionary measures to at least try and follow, but instead, he was more preoccupied with finding ways to ensure that no one actually won the small amount of money that he put up. The situation, I think, really goes to show the character of the individual that's actually running this darknet market. Their name, Andred, alone shows that they're kind of a control freak and, need constant recognition and patting for their ego, for the position that they hold. By far the most telling thing, though, is where he says in a post after the fact about this person who supposedly he was overseeing, "So what happened with the 10K I sent you? Did you just scam me?" Now, remember how at the start of all of this, I said that his language was indicative of someone trying to avoid taking responsibility for something? This is exactly what it was. Remember the PGP side message where, that we checked out earlier? What was the exact wording for that? Archetype will pay the price of 10,000 in XMR and we oversee it. Sounds pretty clear to me. I noticed that the name that they named was the market that he is the big boss chief of. It's funny how, he didn't say that Archetype Defcon host would be doing the payout, rather very specific terms that his market would. So not only did he create a scavenger hunt that is virtually impossible for anyone to actually win from a statistical and mathematical point of view, but in addition to that, he also tried to put the blame for what's apparently now missing money, though he himself originally said that the market that he controls would be the one paying out the 10,000. It's absolutely insane the amount of contradictions and deceptions that's around this entire thing. Big time respect to Locomotive for pointing out the actual issues and going against the grain of the community who, by and large, bought everything that was said, hook, line, and sinker in this case. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.